It's the 22nd of March 2022. I'm Dana Durnford. I'm also known as the nuclear proctologist.org. And you can always call in if you're catching a live show or later at 709-589-4406. 709-589-4406. So, Japan had a major earthquake. Massive, major, there was all kinds of headlines. We covered it originally for a couple of days. And like I said originally, when you do have a big earthquake, it takes about a week for evidence to come out of how big the earthquake actually is. Japan has an incredible legacy of hiding what's going on, and it's for all the wrong reasons. It's because they hate humanity. Atoms for Humanity. The A-10 Warthog only uses dirty bombs. They're actually dirty bombs, and we have a poll for everybody tonight. And the poll asks the question, can harmful amounts of Fukushima radioactive fallout reach the United States of America and Canada? And we have a resounding 27 votes with 100% yes at the beginning of the show. And we appreciate the participation. Deteriorating plant threatens mass extinction around the world. The model to your right is the radioactive fallout modeled by NOAA from America from 2011. This is a 2011 model. Now, the model doesn't actually include the loss of this building, for instance, or the detonation of that building, which was Reactor 3. And at the top of the building was decades of reactor cores, and which is known also as the fuel pools and fuel ponds, etc., spent fuel repository, because you don't have an actual repository in Japan or anywhere else on the planet. That was also all lost. That's Reactor 3 over there. All the reactor buildings had those designs. So they all had the same attributes. Reactor 3 in particular, which what you're looking at, was a mixed oxide facility, MOX, a fuel, the most lethal of lethal. And so what they done was they built a containment, that's the wrong word. They built a structure around it, doesn't physically touch it. So an earthquake can cause the remains to go into another nuclear meltdown if it's not actually already in a constant meltdown. Reactor 3 in particular, it appears that it lost most of the inventory, was ejected a couple of miles at least out of the buildings, and the ensuing fires would have dispersed the radioactive fallout worldwide. And so the idea of that containment there was to fake they put the structure on it with cranes, they built it off site, and then pretend that they were in the building, taking fuel out of a building that doesn't exist. The fuel actually covers the entire planet. That model was a 20-day model. Yesterday, again, this is kind of what I started off with yesterday. Japan's earthquake loss is likely to go into the billions. And this was talking about the March 16th earthquake last week. And so the model that you're looking at is based on a magnitude 7 scale. 7. So 1, 2, 7. And so each number you see there, you have to multiply it by 1.43 to get the Richter scale. And you can see 3/4 of the country, severe shaking. Okay. So the jet streams, this is today's jet stream models. That's Japan over there. This is America. Canada's up above it, etc. North America continent. And so this model, the map updates 4 times a day. I just done this probably 2 hours ago. Now, hawk, as in a bird, like a hawk, dog, immediately after I posted the video, came in and said America was blocked, 100% blocked from the jet streams. Well, that's simply not true. That's simply not true. Okay, so this, I'm taking you from the 22nd. This part here is the 22nd of the jet streams. And I'll explain to you why we're talking about this after. I move it also to the, I centered it at that time. I'll move it through the 23rd, 24th, 25th. This is the 23rd coming up right now, is the 23rd, which is tomorrow's projection. The 24th. And now you can see how the jet stream starts to change. The 25th. The 25th. 26th rather. So you can see the jet stream, how its movement is. But what happens is the jet stream, what you're going to do with the jet stream is, that's how it gets whisked across the Pacific Ocean. It immediately starts dispersing. Now that it only takes a couple of days. This model is based on 16 days. So now you can really see how it's distributed. The jet stream immediately brings it within a couple of days, 72 hours to North America. So that's why I say there's a plume, and quantified those assertions. Why I say there's a plume, of course, is because you just had a major earthquake. The Fukushima fragile facilities, I only showed you reactor 3, but there's multiple melted reactors there. And their fuel pools. The earthquake had to go past Fukushima's destroyed facilities, death machines, I should call them, in order to cause the damage and shake the rest of the country. They claimed there was no damage whatsoever at the Fukushima nuclear power plant, not even an extra Becquerel atomic decay. But there was 1,000 places on the train tracks over a 350 kilometer or mile, I'm not sure off the top of my head, that has to be repaired. So after the Fukushima nuclear meltdown, deteriorating plant threatens mass extinction around the world, and we have done the research expeditions for many years on the Pacific Ocean in order to try to figure out what's really going on, because you can't trust your media. So yesterday's headline came out, Japan's earthquake loss is likely to go into billions. Or Friday's, I think it was, I can't remember. Okay, so let's get into the cycle, and I'll explain to you why we have the headline tonight. I provided documentation. Quake-hit bullet train lines to fully resume before the Golden Week. Following the derailment of 17-car bullet train in an earthquake last week. Now, originally the headlines came out were saying that no big problem, they'll have it up and running within 24 hours. But because Japan has this absurd legacy of lying about every facet to the rest of the world, following the derailment of 17 bullet cars, more than 100 workers were dispatched to the derailment site. It was triggered by a magnitude, an upgraded 7.4 quake, which was the upper 6 of the Japanese seismic intensity scale of 7, which is actually a 9.4. And at a 7.4, 45 miles offshore, and I think it was 45 miles deep or so, won't cause the damage that we're talking about. So they lied about that, like they did last year, by the way, and 2018 earthquake in particular. Those two in particular are easy to prove they lied. Expected to resume from March the 22nd, allowing passengers, which is today, and as tomorrow's it was yesterday we're there too, traveling from Tokyo to reach Koriyama. This is really important. United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation. And these are degenerate scumbags, by the way. But let's use their number because people are brainwashed into thinking that they're the go-to. They're actually just they're United Nations. They're 193 militaries. You know, the people that destroys entire countries for a minimum wage paycheck. Absorbed dose in red bone marrow in Japan for the first year. Now, they're only counting gamma. Average disposition of gamma, which in this case is cesium, which is an utter betrayal to only include cesium. It's ludicrous. But so that second numbers behind me, right? This row right here. That row right there is population in each of these communities. And this is what it is in atomic decays of just cesium, not the rest of the gammas, or not alphas or neutrons or betas. You know, in neutrons, you're talking about uraniums and plutoniums have never been included. None of these numbers are internal doses, they're external doses. And so you can see, again, all these numbers. These are all absurd numbers for just a gamma on top of that, and just a single one. So Koriyama City is 162,000 atomic decays per square meter. Why would you want to go there? So the nuclear industry wouldn't let these victims leave their communities. Kept them there so they can study them and their offsprings if they have them for the rest of their lives. Okay, and so I'll just go all the way through all these communities that these are not evacuated communities. And you can see how heartless and soulless the nuclear industry actually is, in particular United Nations. But this one here, average absorbed doses to the red bone marrow for 10-year-old children. 10-year-old children. For their bone marrow, for the red bone marrow. In the first year, excluding evacuated areas. And so that number, I want you to think about this row here, inhalation plume, where the majority of, there was no internal doses, they claim. I think they should be arrested and summarily executed for doing that. I think that is probably one of the worst crimes in humanity, for them to pretend that people didn't inhale any radiation in these are nuclear wastelands. So they have external plume, external ground, inhalation has nothing. Ingestion, but no inhalation. That's the definition of evil, to do something like that. That's actually evil. They're expected to resume from March 26, allowing passengers to travel from Tokyo to reach the nuclear wasteland. And they have to travel through all these nuclear wastelands to get to the nuclear wasteland known as Koriyama. The company decided not to provide temporary local train services for the section between the Koriyama and Sendai due to the earthquake damage to a bridge, but it was more than one bridge. which sustained the most damage was between Fukushima and Sendai, which the earthquake had to travel past and destroyed reactors in order to get to there, which is way past the coastline. Damage was at 1,000 locations. So there are 1,000 locations, but ground zero, which is right here where the earthquake came ashore, never done no damage to the fragile building, is what they're claiming. We got a real problem on our planet that is jeopardizing all the species, and the future of humanity is known as the nuclear industry. These are degenerate scum. These are degenerate monsters. These are actually monsters. What they're doing and the way they're covering up every facet. There was endless releases, and they have a earthquake with incredible damage. 350 kilometers of the tracks are suspended sections. So how do you cause damage for 350 kilometers of railway tracks far past the nuclear meltdowns, but no damage at the actual nuclear meltdowns themselves? How does that actually work? Because there's 4 confirmed buildings destroyed. They actually covered up this building here. They're still pretending they got the fuel out of the pool at the top of the building that don't even exist. And everybody sits in silence. I'm heartbroken to watch the devastation play out worldwide. Now, to give you some kind of context of how friggin' bad 4 of these reactor buildings actually were, because it's hard, right? Despite the overwhelming amount of evidence I can supply to you people worldwide, it still seems to be really difficult for people to face the truth, face the reality and the facts. I'll give you an idea with 510. With these 11 headlines will help articulate the original nuclear meltdown. But you can translate it into what's happening since March the 16th that they just covered up. So a Fukushima plume model showed 1 million becquerels. I believe this was the xenon 133 or krypton 85. Rain with 20 million particles. Now, a few particles can cause an autoimmune trigger. And then you have Simon Fraser University in British Columbia, Chris Sarkosa, says that it's harmless. It's like 10 becquerels or something a liter. It doesn't actually work that way. Now, I can play you clips, and we've done entire presentations on Chris Sarkosa. This is a despicable betrayal, subhuman at Simon Fraser University. Trust me, 20 million particles of radioactive iodine 131 is an event. It's actually an event. Another study out of Ottawa, Canada, showed these are actual finding per liter of rainwater. It wasn't just iodines either, right? It was 220 million atoms, 220 million. Finding 55, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55 is an actual evacuation, a no-go zone at a nuclear power plant. So if you had 220 million at a nuclear power plant, you would evacuate the site immediately. But that was per liter across the northern hemisphere sustained. And not only that, it doesn't go away for 150 million years because there's what they known as half-lives. There's 10 half-lives. So most people who don't know any better, they hear the word half-life and they think that'll be half gone in whatever the half-life is. In this case, 115 million year times 10. So even 15 million years is going to be long past the human experience. Fukushima, a U.S. nuclear professor, was a major event. Washington had radioactive aerosols at 100,000 times normal. The West Coast completely blacked out due to particles covering it. And ignore Arnie Gunnarsson, he shouldn't have been quoted. What he done to everybody is despicable. Incredible betrayal. Radioactive xenon-133 in Washington at 450,000 times above detection levels, persisted for weeks. These are catastrophic numbers for all the species in particular, but you're talking about 1,800 illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries. And that these plumes, it never stopped coming out of there. And so another major earthquake there reignites debris will fall down on top of the melting 9,000 degree Fahrenheit reactor cores, and that will atomize an aerosol as it's ionized and radiated and will be distributed as death plumes across the planet. Here's Japan Times column: as the public possibly worldwide sickens over time, the truth will come out about Fukushima. As everybody worldwide sickens over time, that's when you'll finally wake up and say, yeah, something must have happened in 2011. Well, you got a plume coming out of there right now. It's hitting North America right now as we speak. 1,500 atoms of the radioactive sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs from spraying the salt water on the reactors. This was a phenomenon they were aware of in the 50s from the Bikini Atoll's ocean testing in particular, where when they set off underwater nuclear bombs, they call it testing, it's actually a genocide. There's over 1 million square kilometers in a 2019 study of Bikini Atoll that is too radioactive for people to live in. 1 million square kilometers decades later. The sulfur, what happens is it turns into this spherical balls, like a soccer ball kind of shape, configuration I should say. And what happens is uranium, plutonium, and americium, neptunium, hot particles will get ingested into the sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs. Now they're super hot particles. They're very mobile. They don't need the jet stream, by the way, to reach North America. And they're liberated back into the environment very easy, and they will last till the end of time. Nuclear fallout will engulf Taiwan. People should stay home or immediately take off their clothes. Rain closed 130 schools in Korea. So you had Taiwan closed their schools and sent everybody home. So Korea closed their schools, sent everybody home. And that hot radioactive particles in Seattle, 50% of the levels seen in Tokyo. But as I showed you in the jet stream, it happens within a couple of days. It starts showing up. And then it's continuously coming out of these places. Back to the story about the earthquake. The latest damage is considered second only to the disruption, which is really downplaying it, caused by the 2011 disaster. So they're saying that this is the worst earthquake since the original 2011, March 2011 Fukushima event. The facilities at the Fukushima station, Fukushima City, which is 60 kilometers away from the nuclear meltdowns, inland were closed and damaged. And it'll take at least 2 weeks to put the derailed train cars back on the tracks and get them in for inspections. So we're talking real damage. And a powerful earthquake off the coast of Fukushima Prefecture last year, in February the 13th, and we covered that. Unfortunately, they took down my main site when I was looking for spiders last year on a research expedition because the spiders are missing from the forest on the east coast. And we've been documenting it for the last couple of years, among other things, of course. Damage to the Tohoku facility at about 940 locations took 11 days to fix in 2021. So that was a 9.2 earthquake. We covered that. Currently, Japan is asking people to conserve energy because they had this massive earthquake last week, 45 kilometers from multiple nuclear meltdowns, and they're claiming the nuclear meltdowns had no adverse side effects and they're extremely fragile, but the sturdy infrastructure was destroyed in over 1,000 places. By the way, 55 countries have banned the food from 14 prefectures, almost half of Japan, for a decade. Not just Fukushima prefecture. So radiation covered the whole country, but they only acknowledged the 14 prefectures, which is quite surprising, really. Power outage alert in Japan amid a quake damage and cold weather. Mari Yamaguchi, who probably, if she was arrested when she was supposed to be arrested in 2011 for the propaganda, she's still being jailed today. Instead, she's still pumping propaganda. It was a reminder of the deadly March quake and tsunami of 2011 that killed thousands, triggered a nuclear disaster that was covered up, and devastated the entire planet, not just the coastline of Japan. Now, currently, several power plants in Japan are actually still down and might not resume operation for several months. Again, what we see is a week after the earthquakes, the truth starts to trickle out, and it's not good. In fact, we can't have a future with nuclear or Japan. Last week's quake caused temporary power outages at 2 million homes in Tokyo, 8 other areas, as the coal-fired plants in the regions were assessed and repaired damages. Several plants are still down and might not resume operations for several months. So they had some serious damage that they hid for a whole week here. Because this is the first time we heard this news, because we're aggregating all the reports for the last week, right? And we covered the original 2 shows, didn't give us any indication it was this bad. They did. At the first couple of shows that I done, they were the cover-ups. That was the evidence we were getting, was the cover-up. They can't hide the fact now they're asking 3 million people to cut back on power. Might not resume operation for several months. That's an event, see? Ask the department stores, supermarkets, convenience stores to turn off their neon signs. Because hell knows Japan got neon signs like nobody else on the planet. And urged factories to conserve as much power as possible. The company earlier Tuesday warned that as many as 3 million homes could lose electricity sometime after 8 p.m. 3 million homes could lose electricity a week later. But there was no damage at ground zero where the earthquake came ashore in fragile buildings that are capable of releasing huge amounts of radioactive emissions that can cover the entire planet. Tuesday's power crunch was believed to be among the worst since the government conducted planned outages in Tokyo area for 10 days after the Fukushima Daiichi meltdowns in 2011. Japan turns down the heat and dims the light to avoid power cuts after the quake. Power crisis in eastern Japan, energy supply short after damage from last week's quake, and unseasonable chill causes a power crunch. And then in the same thing, business lobby talks up nuclear power. So why the word lobby shouldn't be in that equation, by the way. Lobbyists shouldn't exist. These are not. You can't have a future with lobbyists. Is the best way to think about that. Japanese turns off their neon signs after the government issued an urgent call to save energy to avoid blackouts. Up to 3 million households faces the threats of blackouts. And magnitude 7.4 earthquake was upgraded from a 7.3, but it was an upper 6 in Japan's seismic intensity scale of 7, which makes it a 9.4. Because an upper 6 is a 6.5, is a 6.6 and higher. So it's really disgusting and it's really despicable and it's quite heartbreaking that they're willing to do stuff like that. We got a poll tonight, a big shot poll for everybody. Can harmful amounts of Fukushima radioactive fallout reach the US of A and Canada? Yeah, and we got 50 votes, 51 votes, with a 96% of people are very clever and understand the significance. And Toyota announces more suspensions at 8 assembly lines due to the quake today. 18 lines at 11 factories would be idle for up to 3 days. Japan aims to block sex offenders from jobs in schools and childcare. There's an idea. Don't forget universities, because Lord knows the universities are full of pedophiles. Britain is also considering it too, but then they'll have to fire all their professors. Potassium iodine pills are selling like crazy, and then now people are reselling them for up to $200 a pack, 10 times the value. 10 times the going value, because here's alcoholic sake butter appears in Japan. And you don't want to drink sake or eat any food from Japan, from anywhere in Japan. The evidence is so overwhelming that if you do that, that makes you a moron. And if you feed it to your loved ones, it makes you a murderer. Oregon recreations prohibited it from harvesting starfish. Now that's not a healthy starfish at all right there you're looking at. And the research expeditions I've done, that species in particular was one of the few species left on the entire coastline at a 7,500 species. Hang on, bear with me. The nuclear industry is like the world has to realize you have to fight for any kind of future. This industry will exterminate everybody happily. So it didn't just go into the Pacific Ocean, right? It covered the whole planet in just a few days, well, a few weeks. It covered the entire Pacific Ocean in just a few days.
Maybe worse than thought. Studies from last year indicate that radioactive water will contaminate the entire Pacific Ocean in just 6 years. Kim Min-ji reports.
This graphic shows the gradual contamination of the Pacific Ocean due to leaks of radioactive water from the crippled Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan. The simulation, which was run by a German marine research institute, shows the entire Pacific waters being polluted by radioactive water in just 6 years.
Now, of course, as I showed you, it does it in just a couple of days, right? What I done in response to that, of course, was we done research expeditions from British Columbia all the way to Alaska. And this is, each year I was doing this, obviously. Even this year I'll be doing the same thing. But we would spend 4 to 5 months on the ocean without coming home, doing research expeditions.
We're leaving Port Hardy.
And let me just zoom ahead on this stuff.
It's called Bull Cove.
There's 27,000 islands.
See, the fog is...
So there's lots of places
finally
to
lifted.
hide, but it was still hellish. And so I done the research year after year after year, and here's what we discovered was all the species to your left are exterminated. All the species to your left are exterminated, and we done this research year after year. They didn't come back. And this was because of the Fukushima radioactive fallout. And as you can see to the left, it was gorgeous. It was unbelievable. All those species are now permanently exterminated. You'll never take these pictures to the left again. This was because of Japan's radioactive fallout. For the last 11 years, this has not recovered, which means that's an extinction event. These are before and after authentic pictures. The pictures to the right, I went to the same places and documented it. But the whole coastline would look like the pictures to the right. And we'd done the whole coastline year after year. That's an extinction event. That's an extinction event. So back to this story here. Oregon recreationists prohibited from harvesting sea stars. They are one of the, well, there was less than 100 species left of the 7,500 original species, highly visible species. And that's not healthy. That particular species comes in multiple colors. And that was one of the few starfish species that we did find. It was very sporadic, by the way. And they refused to acknowledge the documentation I showed you just now of the coastline. They refused to acknowledge those species existed. That's how bad the cover-up is. Lanka Deploys Troops as fuel shortages sparked protests. There was actually 3 women dropped dead waiting to get kerosene for cooking. It's heartbreaking. 59% of Japanese fear attacks on nuclear power plants in Japan. Probably the only good news I heard all year. Hopefully they'll never turn their nuclear on again. And this story I threw out because it's despicable and it's from Japan. So, popular caramel maker sues foreign workers for calling a strike. It was Vietnamese workers, which are imported into Japan as slave labor. They have no rights or no freedoms. And they're being abused. And so they're being sued and fired for going on a strike about working conditions. Japan's a democratic country. Notice regarding the impact of Fukushima coastal earthquakes. These are a big group and corporation, I should say. Production equipment have been damaged and production has been suspended. Investigation restoration work is underway. They figure they'll be up and running in May. So you're seeing all kinds of different companies acknowledging they had severe damage, but that wasn't reported in the media until recently. Look at that. Again, it's impossible to trust the Japanese, or the nuclear industry, I should say, worldwide. But what Japan is doing is just plain evil. It's just evil. Plans to resume operation in early May at the earliest. Tokyo, notifications of the impact of the earthquake which struck Fukushima, Japan last week. On March 16, 2020, which struck Fukushima, but didn't cause any damage at the fragile nuclear meltdowns. Alex is getting lead underwear. That's hilarious. Let's finish it out. Britain wants to resume nuclear power, and this is a new nuclear power plant they're planning on building, and surrounded by farms. It's actually evil to do stuff like that, by the way. I'll show you what I mean. I think the pictures I showed you, what size will be surrounded by farms. Why would you build a nuclear power plant surrounding it by farms? This is a future nuclear power plant they're going to build in Britain, surrounded by farms, as far as you can see. But most nuclear power plants, when you look it up, are surrounded by farms. Does anybody think that's an accident? Does anybody think all these nuclear power plants and future nuclear power plants on top of that are surrounded by farms is an accident? And I got over 100 of those pictures. I'm not going to do that to you tonight, but I have over 100 of those pictures. Would be like Chernobyl on steroids. If the spent fuel catches fire. Would be like Chernobyl on steroids. So what they're saying is each reactor building is what they're actually talking about. The fuel pools at the top of the building holds 3,450 spent fuel assemblies, and each assembly is around 100 fuel rods that are 12 feet long and 18 pounds each. And so let's just do the math on that. Because Japan is claiming there's only 500 assemblies, and the reactors actually hold 800 assemblies. 800 assemblies. So 3,450, yeah? 3,450. So let's go times 90 fuel rods. And multiply that by 18 pounds each. And it's 5.6 million pounds. And divide that by 2,000 to get tonnage. is 2,800 pickup trucks, 1-ton pickup trucks, to give you context of how much we're actually talking about. So 2,000, imagine if you got to control the keys for 2,800 pickup trucks. It's a daunting task, right? Just to give you context what we're talking about in the fuel pools. Now, this picture here, all the spent fuel removed from reactor 4 fuel pool. This is 2013. I'll show you what reactor 4 actually looked like, and I'll play you a little clip of one of the journalists actually pretending they're in the fuel pool 100 feet above the wreckage, 160 feet really, and they're above the wreckage to your left.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011, leading to the country's worst nuclear disaster.
Right, and so why is the media faking being in a building that don't exist? We need to do a video just on that only again. And the question will be, should the people that are faking being in a building that don't exist be jailed for the rest of their natural life? We got a poll tonight. Can harmful amounts of Fukushima radioactive fallout reach the USA and Canada? And some people made a mistake and voted no, or they're just scumbags. Government's answer to protect the children in Fukushima, the children, was to wear long sleeve shirts while at the radioactive schools. A medical expert, U.S. medical group, Japan's safety standards and radiation levels for children are unconscionable. Paper, it's hard to imagine something more frightening than 5-year-old children marching off to irradiated school playgrounds with dosimeters, not even Geiger counters, but dosimeters strapped to their chest. It was around 80,000 children that was in one report. Rather than evacuate the children, they gave them dosimeters, which you can't check on your own. You've got to send away to a university to pacify the parents and concerns in the communities. This is what I mean. Like, the nuclear academic is actually the definition of monsters. Rather than let the children say, my God, you got to get the children out of there. They're 1,000 times more vulnerable than an adult. Radiation from Fukushima has seeded Chernobyl, now at levels unknown to humans or machines. A human rights violation. Well, people were being stripped of their hair and vomiting uncontrollably from the doses. These are lethal doses. And they try to blame it on evacuation. Over 3,000 people died shortly after. The evacuees, who were trying to get out of harm's way too late, as I might add, had got lethal doses and died. The nuclear industry, even today, is trying to blame it on evacuation. But if you look at evacuations for hurricanes where tens of millions of people evacuated, you've never, ever seen mass casualties like we've seen at Japan's nuclear meltdowns. The only time we've seen that was from the nuclear meltdown in Japan. New York Times contributor confirms California rainwater 181 times above the drinking water standards. And the drinking water standards are unconscionable in the United States, by the way. The nuclear industry has no resistance. They just keep raising the limit in increments over the decades, and nobody's ever challenged them on that. And now they can have a meltdown in your garden and the dose will be considered acceptable because you didn't hold them accountable. You weren't aware, right? Radioactive fallout and rain, by the way, is 10 times more than originally reported. And Canadian radiation tests showed iodine, which is a tracer, right? So your Geiger, it's a gamma, your Geiger counter can find it. Not all, by the way. But what it means is there's an ongoing criticality, ongoing nuclear meltdown, and that it's fresh radioactive fallout. It's coming from somewhere fresh. It's a very nasty isotope, by the way, but it's also used for an equation. So when you got a number of iodine-131, you can extrapolate all kinds of other isotopes because there's a typical ratio creation. Like 10 times more iodine-132 for every iodine-131. There's 30 times more iodine-133 for every iodine-131. There's 31 times more iodine-129 for every iodine-131. By the way, the iodine-132 and the iodine-133 are 10 times more effective at ionizing and radiating the thyroid glands of humans and birds and animals and mammals and insects than the very effective iodine-131 is. They didn't report on it. Rain out of hot particles from radioactive clouds to continue for another year, not just in the Pacific Northwest. Because a lot of people think the plume comes in, the model stops, then there's no more plume. This is Stockholm Syndrome. Many at Fukushima now have brain damage. Worker developed 3 types of cancer in a year. Officials admit deadly Fukushima cover-up in 2016. TEPCO president, we lied about the meltdowns. It was a cover-up. It's an unprecedented nuclear disaster. They're still lying about it today, and they will for the rest of our lives. But this is the only time in history where we have the ability to come out and challenge those lies, despite the censorship, despite the complacency and apathy. We still have the opportunity and the ability to counter the lies. And we have to seize up on this so that there's a future for humanity and species. We come for your children. That's the nuclear industry. And United Nations and the World Health Organization, which is United Nations. That's the definition of evil, the United Nations and their subsidy. They're truly, as you might not appreciate it or realize it now, but you will, that was the worst thing can happen to a planet, was 193 militaries got together and conspired to destroy humanity instead of the endless war. It's an endless war on everything and everybody. Radiation forecast in Japan kept secret to avoid panic in the whole of society. No, to avoid the nuclear industry getting their just dessert and as a genocide and omnicide weapon. I'm here to make sure the nuclear industry gets its just dessert. TEPCO to begin coating seafloor with cement mixture. Because when these reactors detonated, a lot of fuel, or some of the fuel certainly, landed in the ocean, where it's still splitting the atom for the next million years. TEPCO completes covering the seafloor with layers of cement, but more coating was used on reactor 5 and 6 than for reactor 1, 2, 3, and 4 combined. And I still don't understand what really happened there. I got to find the rest of that information one of these days. This is a very scary, impossibly high. The World Health Organization, which is United Nations, 193 militaries, it's just a scumbag, degenerate, mass murdering organization. Initially reported estimated Tokyo and Osaka, which is 600 kilometers south of Fukushima's meltdowns, infant thyroid doses of 10,000 to 100,000 microsieverts. and up to 1 full sievert in Nami. What's interesting is you shouldn't be counting it in microsieverts or sievert. Well, if it's sieverts, sure. But 10 to 100,000 microsievers, you're talking about hundreds of millions of atomic decays. Impossibly high, see? Man arrested for collecting radioactive rubble 60 kilometers from the multiple nuclear meltdowns. He wasn't collecting radiation on purpose. If he was, it was to get rid of it. Radioactive pollen up to 2,000 grains inhaled in a cubic meter of air. Because all the plants in Japan are emitting radioactive pollen. Wherever that lands is slightly radioactive. The whole planet now is radioactive. This is why we have climate change, because of 76 years of nuclear emissions. Japan's, because it never stops pulsing energy at 186,000 miles per second. Professor who met with Fukushima physicians, thyroid diseases are already apparent, diseased newborns and Down syndrome. Because after Chernobyl, we've seen huge clusters of Down syndromes. Radiation causes endless problems. Heart, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia. There's 1,800 illnesses. But what happens really for newborns and neonates, the parents have ingested a lot of thyroid into their thyroid, or a lot of radiation into their thyroid, and that's turned into radioactive hormones. And so the radioactive hormones is just insidious attack upon your entire system, and your pituitary, which is in the back of your head, sequesters a lot of hormones from the thyroid, of course, and hangs onto it there and distributes it out. So it causes just huge issues, absurd amount of huge issues. Controversy after U.S. government estimates showed 40,000 microsievert thyroid doses for California infants after Fukushima. The data not released to the public, very high dose to the children. So you expect to see a lot of obesity in the children and adults from radiation poisoning is a marker of brain damage, radiation brain damage. And that's what you're seeing now worldwide, is this incredible, unbelievable damage. Cancer risks increases with any level of radiation exposures. New model shows West Coast covered in Fukushima followed a week after 3/11. And again, like the French model really does tell the story. It's only a 16-day model, which is the scariest part about this. Imagine after 11 years how bad this got. This affects all species. X-ray-like images show how radioactivity has spread throughout the bodies of the Fukushima wildlife that survived. Of course, they disappeared a few years later. So when you took X-rays of animals and insects, they were getting radiation, showing the radiation. It was the same thing for the trees too, by the way. In fact, worm excrements 60 miles from the multiple nuclear meltdowns, the worm's excrement in the soil per kilogram was 1.4 million atomic decays a second. This is stunning numbers we're talking about. And they're shipping that food, still growing food, never stopped, and they're shipping that worldwide, murdering everybody. You have to avoid the Japanese food with diligence. Cesium remains dispersed throughout the water column from the surface to the ocean floor, from the very surface all the way down to the ocean floor. Fukushima radiation cells circling the globe. 5 out of 7 babies born with the birth defects at Fukushima Hospital, Down syndrome. Head of the Fukushima Health Study, the head of the medical study in Fukushima, says 100 millisieverts a year is okay for pregnant women. The effects of radiation do not come to people that are happy. They come to people that are weak-spirited. In fact, in the video, he says, won't come to people that smile. But radiation health specialists says children with over 11 becquerels a kilogram of cesium, of gamma, not counting alpha, beta, or neutrons, will start to see heart problems. So you got to protect your children. It's worse than you can imagine. I'm barely... Like what I show you is just a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent of what I show here each year. 16,000 workers have quit. Well, that's not true. 16,000 homeless people and destitute and victims of society and the immigrants who don't speak the language quit. That's true. But there ain't 16,000 workers. They're victims. They don't even know what they're doing. No education. That's the qualification. In 2018, airborne radiation near Fukushima nuke plant still far higher than the government max. That can't come down for a couple of 100 centuries. This is one of my favorite stories to show you how insane this industry actually is. Temporary radioactive soil storage site hinders the farmers in Fukushima. It didn't hinder that farmer. He's still harvesting his food. Harvesting rice in one of the paddies in Fukushima Prefecture, alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation. Another rice paddy serves as a temporary storage site for 6 years. It's not a temporary storage site. The bags were only meant to last a year. 2 years at most. Every time it rained, it goes right through the bags. They don't hold anything. It's the definition of evil, by the way. 100 becquerels before Fukushima kilogram is nuclear waste. After 100 becquerels is safe to eat. In France, in September, they had a fire at one of their nuclear sites. They were packaging radiation at 17 becquerels a kilogram for storage. 30 times less than what Japanese at the same time was 500 becquerels a kilogram. Because this one never came out until 2012. Up to then it was 500 becquerels a kilogram. And what they were doing was giving the farmers Geiger counters and telling them if the radiation is over 500 becquerels a kilogram, mix it with rice that's not radiated or don't sell it. I mean, the definition of evil is beyond imagination when it comes to nuclear. Japanese foreign minister stopped claiming that the food is safe to eat. Worst case scenario was abandoned Tokyo. If you have a nuclear meltdown by New York, you're going to lose New York, for instance. It's impossible to remove hundreds of radionuclides, or radioactive materials, in the 1,200 radionuclides. 1,200 radionuclides. Not just iodine, not just cesiums. And the previous cesium limits, the gamma, was 0.1 becquerels a kilogram. Now it's 1,000 times higher. That, by the way, a pregnant woman who gets a couple of x-rays will damage the child. And what the expeditions I've done along the coastline quantifies that statement. And radiation around Fukushima at levels where humans vomit uncontrollably and the hair was stripped from the body. That ain't never going to go away. Probably one of the sickest stories to come out of there. And there's a lot, actually, but this is one of the sicker ones. Baby food maker refused to acknowledge they had radiation over the limits. There is no safe limit, by the way, in baby food. And he waited a couple of weeks before they finally looked into it. You got any idea how vulnerable a baby is to sequestering radiation? And who works at the nuclear power plants? Academics, nuclear scientists, nuclear university students, nuclear corporations, and the destitute and unskilled. And who participated in the cover-up? One of the most prolific lawyers was Arnie Gunnarsson and Helen Caldicott, Christopher Busby. Talk about stabbing you in the back. What they done was unconscionable. The cover-up was right directly back to those types of people. So the Plumes we're worried about, rightfully so, happening as we speak, coming in, is because we have a legacy that we understand how this works, right? We know that the jet streams come right in over the continent. Let me show that to you again. These are from today, the 22nd, and you can see the jet streams. Now, once the jet streams bring it across, it spreads out. It doesn't just follow that line. That's the highway, but it obviously disperses out immediately, and this gives you a much better idea. But the jet streams I showed you were the current jet stream models. I got no idea what's going to happen, folks. All we know is that they lied about any damage to the nuclear power plant. But we see damage right across the country. We see the insurance agency saying it's going to be in the billions. Not just 1 or 2 billions, but in the billions of damage. And finally, a week later, we see incredible damage throughout the Fukushima prefecture. But where the nuclear power plants is where the earthquake came ashore. And they're claiming there's no adverse effects from that. Look, we already seen what they've done for 11 years. How do you pretend that this didn't happen? We done the research expedition, showed it to be an actual extinction event. And so what can you do now that if we do got a plume coming in? You got no one to turn to be honest. That's honestly going to give us real information. That no universities, no government agencies, just zero medias out there are going to give you any, or even going to show anything I showed you. Nothing. None of them are even going to acknowledge it. But it happened, for sure. And so normally what you would do is you would tape up your windows. You'd tape up your door. You would shelter in your home. You would change the filters on, you would have humidifiers in your home to help filter some of the radiation out of the air you're going to be breathing. You use heavy filters in your water to try to filter that out. And you would want to do that for a couple of weeks. And because that's what you would normally do, right? You would tape off your doors so radiation couldn't come in. You would keep your windows closed, turn off your air conditioning, stuff like that. And I recommend that again. Look, you can't... Everything helps. Everything you do helps. And on the other side of it, you don't have anybody out there in the universities or the academic world that haven't stabbed you in the back for 11 years. You don't have a single media out there that hasn't stabbed you in the back now for 11 years. And of course, I'm the bad guy for being honest. Right? I get shit on and abused and attacked and ignored and everything else. And all I'm trying to do is the moral and ethical thing, because I can't find somebody else doing it. So I had to create this whole operation in order to try to get people's attention long enough to warn them that, hey, you better start paying attention to what you're eating. You better start paying attention to what you're giving your loved ones. You better realize this is not a game. You got to realize how late it is and how deep down the hole we actually are. And I mean, I showed a couple of studies last night that showed how they calculated the dose rates for the population after the original 2011 event. It should make you weak. You kind of lose faith in humanity when you see that those academic studies, it's really truly shocking. We got 72 votes here. We're going to end the poll. We're still trying to get back on track. We've been off track for a couple of weeks now. We got 72 votes. 96% of the people correctly voted. 73 votes. Can harmful amounts of Fukushima radioactive fallout reach the United States of America and Canada? And that's the correct answer, was yes. And it does it very quickly. This is NOAA's model. Yeah, and so that was a good poll, and I would appreciate everybody participating in the poll. Yeah, strontium created Alex pointed out strontium creates stunted growths in 2-year-olds that got irradiated in 2009. Right, and that's 100% true, folks. And thank you, Alex. Donated $50 last week. That was very kind of you. And we were out on the trail. Probably going to go pick up the trail cams tomorrow or the next day, because the weather is just bizarrest weather we've ever seen in history. Let me say goodnight to everybody. All you wonderful people. Patrick, Doug Bullocks, Chelsea, Albert, Peaceware, James Lucet, John Curtis. They're saying now there's a 4.5 earthquake in Japan right now. And of course, you can't trust Japan because that's probably on the international or the Japanese scale, which is significantly more. I'll do a quick Patrick, had a quick shout out, PBS. Sandra Churchill. Hi, Sandra. Colette is out there somewhere, I'm sure. Starlight. John Schiffett. Hi, John. Just scrolling down from the top of the names, just looking for a quick shout out to people. Hello to everybody else that's not chatting. Thank you, everybody. Shayla White. Hi, Shayla. Port Angeles. Turkey. Sue, I believe. Almost down. I always seem to miss a few names. It's hard to scroll down at the end of these. I should take like screen captures during the show, and then I can just flick through it a lot easier. But I always manage, so it doesn't matter. Looks like I got everybody, did I? We'll get down to the most recent comments now. Darlene. Go one love. Yeah, don't eat the yellow snow. Dennis. God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody. Thank you, James. Lucid. That's good timing. God bless everybody. And have a great night. Great day tomorrow. Cough mixture. I'd consider avoiding the weather for at least a few days till we figure out what the hell is going on. That's what I'm going to be doing. It's just heartbreaking that the nuclear industry hates all the species and humanity so much. Don Vincent, Mr. Sir. Good night, everybody. God bless everybody. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Appreciate everybody participating in the polls. I'll be on the prowl all night for more news. If we get any breaking news, I'll put out a blurp blurp. As soon as I know, hopefully you'll know. Looks like I got everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow night, Wednesday night. And I'm sure we're going to get more updates tomorrow night on this stuff. We're going to stay on this subject for the rest of the week and flush it out and see what we can figure out. Hugs for you and your loved ones and your friends and your families and your pets. Have a great night and a great day tomorrow. It's a great day to be alive. Let's keep it that way and avoid Japanese food like a plague it is. Hugs for everybody. Take care, folks.